Hello and welcome to my Crusader Kings III review. Crusader Kings III was released on the 1st of September by Paradox Interactive. I'm going to get this out of the way really early on and say that if you have played Crusader Kings II and it's a game that you enjoy, you are almost certainly going to feel at home with Crusader Kings III. There hasn't been a huge amount of change in the core game. Certainly there are some differences, there are a few things that have been simplified, and the game has received an update in terms of the engine and graphics. I'll try not to make too many comparisons to Crusader Kings II, because bearing in mind that is a game that is almost 9 years old and has had a lot of DLC and expansions over those years. So speaking of those changes to the game that have updated it and made it a little more fresh, just quickly going to jump in and show the settings screen here under graphics, and you can see there is now quite an extensive list of 3D options in here, which seems like a lot for a Paradox Grand Strategy game. And that is because they have now removed all of the 2D portraits of characters that you had in Crusader Kings II, and they've all been replaced with these 3D models like you see here on the title screen. Not only that, but the map has been updated to a much better model as well. In terms of performance, there haven't been any issues for me personally, graphical performance-wise, and that's because even though it does use these 3D models, it's not really graphically taxing in that way. The issue that Crusader Kings II used to have was very much in terms of processing performance. During the late game, once there were many enemies, many armies moving around on the map, the game would actually start to slow down. And that was mostly because the Clausewitz engine was unable to use multiple cores or even multiple threads. It couldn't hyperthread. So you were basically running the game on only a fraction of your CPU, and it used to slow down. Certainly don't have that problem on Crusader Kings III. There were some performance issues on launch day or day or two after, but they seem to have patched that out because it's working absolutely fine. While we're talking about patches, let's get on to bugs as well. Personally, I've only encountered a few really minor things, certainly nothing game-breaking. Most of the things that I've seen that could be described as bugs are when the text misreports something. So, like, there will be some text that says a certain thing is going to happen, but it's actually something else that happens, which is annoying if you're making plans around what the in-game text is telling you, but it's not majorly game-breaking. I've seen some numbers and percentages that don't add up properly like they should do, but that seems to be par the course for Paradox Grand Strategies. There's always issues with the text and with numbers and statistics adding up and things like that. There are a few exploits in the game, as is. A few people have found various ways to do things, such as getting your character stats ridiculously high up. Also, the AI seems to be really bad at managing its economy, which means it tends to have the cheapest of cheap armies. So as a player, you can just basically spam out bowmen and beat the AI in combat that easily. So there are definitely a few issues that need sorting out, but you know, we're only just over a week away from release. There's already been a patch to fix a few things, and I imagine over the course of this game's life cycle that there'll be quite a lot changed. Now, I did say that this game isn't quite as complex as Crusader Kings II, and that may be because obviously we don't have 9 years worth of DLC and expansions. And that is good because it might actually help some new players get into the game. Now, I do feel that some of the places where it has been made a little bit more simplistic are the wrong places. I think that the game has been simplified in areas that were already fairly simple, and I will go into that. So, what if you are a new player to the Crusader Kings franchise? So let's go in and hit new game. So the first thing to remember about Crusader Kings in terms of grand strategy games is it's not so much a game about combat, but it's a game about characters. You don't play Crusader Kings as a nation, you play Crusader Kings as an individual. In fact, you actually play as the head of, well, not even always the head, you play as a character within a certain dynasty. And when your character dies, providing your dynasty has an heir, you will then play as the heir and carry on until eventually your dynasty dies out. And because of that, this is very much a game about the way you interact with characters. Quite often, the best way to expand in this game isn't always to go to war with people and actually fight them in combat, but using diplomacy and spycraft are all things that you can actually use to expand. And this game resonates with people who love RPGs. It resonates with people, even people who play things like The Sims, are strangely drawn to Crusader Kings, and it's very easy to see why, because of the way it plays. So I want to sort of introduce this to new players a little bit, but obviously this is a review, not a tutorial. So I just want to sort of say how a new player is likely to find this game. So at the start of the game, you have 2 years that you can start from. You can start from the year 867, and you can start from the year 1066. Now, along the top, you'll notice that there are several different buttons for each of those years, and they give you some sort of theatres or sort of campaigns that you can choose from, and it highlights some important characters in those regions. So if we go in and look at the fate of England, for example, we've got Norway, we've got Scotland, England, Normandy, and Denmark. We can go into Iberia in pieces, and then we see a number of characters in northern Iberia. But you can, of course, go to Play as Any Ruler in 1066, this button down here in the bottom left, or you can go down and play as any ruler in 867. So much like in Crusader Kings 2, you can go in and literally play as any character. You're not just limited to the ones that appear here on these initial screens. One thing that you cannot do is create your own character. That was something that you couldn't do in Crusader Kings 2 initially, but it was added in a DLC. Also, Crusader Kings 2 DLCs added a lot more starting years, and I assume the same will happen eventually with CK3. So there is a tutorial, and for new players, I would definitely recommend giving the tutorial a whirl. Even though Crusader Kings 3 is not as complex as Crusader Kings 2, it's still a fairly complex game to learn. So here we are in the tutorial. The tutorial is essentially a guided experience where you play as a particular character, and essentially the tutorial walks you through with these little pop-ups and tells you what buttons to press, tells you what to do. You can skip these lessons, and you can just go and skip through the tutorial when you want to. So you don't necessarily have to do any of the things in the tutorial. You can skip through them. You can turn them back on at any time you want. There are certain points where it will pause like this, where it wants me to highlight text. And this is another important part of the tutorial. So you will notice whenever you see text boxes, there are some words that are highlighted in blue. If you mouse over them, you will get a little pop-up box that tells you or gives you an explanation of what that term means. And you will also find that there are blue linked words within those explanations. So you can mouse over those and it will open another box telling you about that. And then you can go over another one, and then you can go over another one. Now, this is a particular bug that I have noticed. You will now see that I'm trying to move the mouse over the... See, that box worked, but some of them really struggle. Sometimes when you mouse over a particular pop-up and you try to then move the mouse over the next box, it disappears, and you can't actually mouse over it. So if I want to click on scheme there, for example, on the bottom line, I can't... Oh, no, now it's let me do it. Although before it wouldn't. Now I'm trying to go down to personal, and it's not letting me go down. So that is definitely a bug that I've noticed with the tutorial. So I do hope that that gets fixed. But that is essentially how the tutorial works. The whole tutorial experience only takes about 10 or 15 minutes. Then after that, it kind of just lets go of your hand and lets you play on your own. Now, it does still have context-sensitive tutorials. So the first time you encounter a specific mechanic, or the first time you open a specific window, you are going to get a little pop-up that tells you what that window does or how that mechanic works. It's not perfect. Paradox games never have been in terms of their tutorials. You will find that there are concepts that it doesn't explain to you at all, and there are concepts that it kind of gives you half of the information. And there will be windows for things that you will never actually find. Like, this is a classic example, actually, the Faith window. Unless you click on this little button down here, you will probably never know this thing exists, because I don't think there's any point where the tutorial actually ever tells you about it. Now, once you click on this, you will get a pop-up that tells you what this does. But unless you go exploring the interface and click on that button, you are very unlikely to find it. But I would still recommend that all new players do go through and play the tutorial, because it will give you some much needed information. If you are a Crusader Kings II veteran, you can probably skip the tutorial completely because the game works in pretty much the same way, although there have been some minor changes and additions which might make it worthwhile for you to actually play through it and just find out what those changes are. So as you can see, Crusader Kings III has definitely had a graphical update from Crusader Kings II, mostly with the addition of these 3D character portraits. So every character that you can speak to has a 3D portrait, and they're all actually quite well modeled. There's a lot of variety between them. You will notice some things that actually pop up, such as naked characters is one to be wary of, especially if you want to be streaming this game on Twitch or YouTube or something like that. So if you go into the settings under game, actually not under game, it's under rules. When you start a new game, but you can show graphic diseases and injuries. That's another thing that can actually pop up as well. So the models are quite detailed, but yes, if you are intending to play this game on Twitch or YouTube, you may want to go into the game rules when you start a game. It'll be in here somewhere. We have, I think it's down here on the bottom left corner. So yeah, character nudity, so you can turn that off down there. But there definitely have been some graphical updates. The user interface does take up quite a lot of the screen, as you can see. The game here is running in 1920 by 1080, and the user interface is running at 100% scale. You might want to scale it down a little bit. You do have the option to do that. Scaling it down will make it take up less space on the screen, but the text does become a little harder to read. I haven't tried it in resolutions lower than 1080p, but I would suspect that if you go much lower than that, the UI is going to take up quite a lot of space, and if you reduce the size of the UI, the text is going to be very hard to read. At higher resolutions, you might actually find you need to scale the UI up so that the text becomes readable. As with all Paradox games, the UI is always very, very busy. It's not a bad thing. There's a lot of information there, but you can find yourself squinting sometimes, particularly when they use these italicized fonts. So let's just back out. One of the things that they have simplified are the map modes. There are far fewer map modes than there were in previous Crusader Kings game. So you've got a number of buttons down here in the bottom right hand corner to allow you to switch between the modes, such as individual duchies, kingdoms and empires. And then you've also got some other useful things down here like the faith map mode, the culture map mode and the houses map mode, which is essentially your dynasty. There is a little plus button that has a few extra ones here: government, development, terrain and counties. But the map mode that you will be using most of the time is the Realms map mode. And actually, when you're not in the Realms map mode, there's a little button appears down here at the bottom. So in the Realms map mode, this is actually now context sensitive to zoom level. So as we are in medium zoom, we can see the individual realms. So we can see England and Scotland here and the little nations that will eventually make up Wales. If we zoom out, we get the paper map. Here's the full map, by the way, if you want to see how much of the world is playable. So we've got down to about halfway down through Africa, and we've got most of East Asia in there, but obviously we've got no Japan, obviously no America as well. Iceland did just make it in there in the corner. So this is the full map, as it were. And then we go back into our medium zoom and we go back into the Realms map mode. And then if we zoom all the way in, it goes into terrain map mode, so we can actually see what the different terrain is. And in Crusader Kings II, if you've played that, you'll be used to selecting individual counties, and then within a county, you can select the individual holdings, your baronies, your towns, your bishoprics. But in Crusader Kings III, you can actually click on the individual holdings within a county. So the yellow outline is the county, and then you can click on the individual holdings in there. So that's a nice little addition to the game there. Another thing that appears to have made it over from Crusader Kings 2 from one of the DLCs, from the Way of Life DLC, is the lifestyle choices. So you can pick a lifestyle choice that is based on your primary stat and your education. You'll get a bonus to experience gained if you do that, or you can pick any of the others. Why do you gain experience? Well, this is now a much more complicated system than it was in Crusader Kings 2. In CK2, you basically picked diplomacy, martial stewardship, intrigue, or learning, and every now and then you would get some events that might randomly give you a plus or a minus to that particular stat. In Crusader Kings III, you actually have a number of talent trees. So if we go, for example, oh, okay, let me get that right. If we go, for example, into Martial here, we can choose between Strategy Focus, Authority Focus, and Chivalry Focus. All three of these will give us a different distribution of stats and abilities. Like Strategy Focus gives us +3 to our Martial score. Authority Focus would give us +1 to our Martial score, but also give us an extra 20% Dread, and plus 0.3 growth per month. And obviously Chivalry Focus gives us some attraction, opinion, and advantage, which basically is when you are fighting in battles. When you are leading a battle, you get an advantage. Regardless of whichever of those three you pick, you also have these three talent trees, and as you perform certain actions in a certain lifestyle, you will gain experience. Once that experience gets to the top, you can unlock one of these perks, and as you get down to the bottom of a skill tree, you usually get something relatively decent. Like this one gives you the Gallant, that gives you +2 Martial, +4 Prowess, +20% monthly prestige, and +20 attraction opinion. You don't have to go down these in order, so you could go down one of these and then start on another and then start on the third. You do need to sort of backfill them all in to get right down to the bottom, but you can actually get all of these unlocked. Now, because this particular character has a martial education and has a high martial score, actually already starts with some of his martial tree filled in. If we were to go into the diplomacy tree, for example, everything in here is blank, but we could go in and pick one of the diplomacy focuses, and then we could go in and start populating that. So that is actually something I like. The improved and expanded lifestyle choices in there. Another thing that has been added is this like little meter down in the bottom left hand corner. This is stress. So this is great for people who like to role play the game, particularly those RPG lovers and Sims lovers. So the way that stress works is if you make any decisions that go against your character's traits, you can gain stress. So if we look at our character, we can see that our character is arbitrary, arrogant, and ambitious. So if we were to take an option that didn't push towards our ambition, or if we were to pick an option that didn't pick, you know, if we picked the humble option instead of an arrogant option, we'd likely gain stress. If we picked a thoughtful action rather than an arbitrary action, we'd gain stress. And, you know, if this is basically the way it works. So unlike in Crusader Kings II, where you could pick whichever option you wanted, it didn't really make a lot of difference. You can still pick whichever option you want here, but if you pick one that goes against your personality traits, you will gain stress. And there are 3 stress levels. For each 100 stress you get, you gain a stress level. And those stress levels increase the chance for bad events. They can lead to mental breaks and health issues with your character. There are some perks from certain skill trees that actually benefit from stress. Like, for example, the Torturer skill tree over here, Thriving in Chaos, we would gain additional martial intrigue and prowess per stress level. So there's actually a reason there to get your stress up, but it comes at a price. It's risky business. There are certain ways to reduce the stress, like doing certain events. For example, there are decisions that you can take within the game, such as holding a feast and going on a pilgrimage and calling a hunt, and these things help to reduce stress. You can also get pets and pet them to reduce stress, which is a really nice thing. So I said some things had been simplified. What has been simplified? Well, the major thing that has been simplified is the way that managing armies work. So if we open the military panel here, we can see that we have a button for levies. We have a button for knights, which are a new addition to CK3. They weren't in CK2. We have the ability to create men-at-arms regiments. Now, men-at-arms are essentially the same as retinues in Crusader Kings II. So they are a standing army that you pay constant maintenance for. However, unlike CK2, you can actually now stand them down, where you'll just pay a reduced maintenance for them. And obviously you've got mercenaries, holy orders, which you can recruit in certain situations, and special soldiers as well, which we actually start with a couple on this particular campaign. Now you'll also see that you can set a rally point, and you can tick the monthly reinforcement on or off. Now you can have multiple rally points. Your rally point is normally your capital. As you can see, it's down here with this little red flag. So we can raise the local army here, or we can raise all. one thing that you will notice is that you can only raise or disband all of your levies together. Unlike Crusader Kings II, where you could just raise the levies that belong to your vassal, you either have to raise all of your own levies with them or none at all. Now, this does make things simpler, but at the same time it is removing great tactical opportunities. In Crusader Kings II, as often as you could, you would fight battles by only raising the levies that belonged to your vassals. That way, firstly, you didn't have to pay any maintenance for them because your vassals did. And secondly, it meant if those armies were taking losses, it wasn't your men, it was your vassals' men, which was a great way of keeping your vassals in check because it stopped them from getting too powerful. So they've actually simplified this now. You can create men-at-arms regiments from the beginning of the game, which is something that you couldn't do in Crusader Kings 2 because they were basically behind some technology unlocks. So they have simplified that. And we're going to have a little bit more of a look into armies in a second. But I also want to talk about something else that they have simplified, and that is the, well, two things actually, the laws and the technology. So technology comes down to culture. We can see our culture here. We've got the eras along the top, and then we have a number of technologies divided into military, civics, cultural and regional. And these things do naturally go up over time. Whoever is the cultural head can actually choose a focus, which is the one that will get some automatic growth. But it's not linear, but it's pretty simplistic. You tend to come in, click on one of these, and just leave it to do its thing. It's not like it was in CK2, where you are basically distributing points between various different technologies to unlock them at different levels. Another thing that has been made significantly simpler are the laws. As you can see, we now have Crown Authority here. So Autonomous Vassals, Limited Crown Authority, High Crown Authority, and Absolute Crown Authority. These do change slightly depending on the culture of the house that you're playing as. But that's about it in terms of the laws. You can't really mess around too much with individual laws within them. So let us get back to combat, because there is something else that I want to show, which again is pretty significant, and it's ideal because we're currently in 2 wars. If you click on one of the war flags, it will show you who you're at war against. So basically you are the blue, well, you and your allies are blue, your enemies are red. There's another war that we are in as well. Not too sure why we're showing red in the war, but we're basically being attacked down there by Brittany. But let's go ahead, and we've got some troops raised somewhere. We've got these troops here. Now, these troops don't have a commander. You can see we've actually got 2 different armies together. So there's 2 armies of 700, along with, and it gives us the total there. So it's a 1,400 strong army. There is no commander at the moment here. So let's go ahead and raise all of our levies. So we're just going to unpause the game because at the moment we only have 7 men. So we'll just unpause, and they will all raise, and we'll get the full amount. And there we are. The flag has changed colour, so it's now at the full amount. If we select this group, you can now see that we've got our 3.73k levies and the 2 700 strong special armies. Now these armies can all be merged together into a single army. We can split them in half. We can split off hired soldiers. We can split off a new army and move men between different armies. So, you know, we can split them down into any number of smaller armies. But one thing that you no longer have is the Crusader Kings II mechanic of having a central vanguard and a left and right flank. So when you get involved into combat, let's go ahead and just try and move this army over here if we can. When you get involved in combat, you no longer have this management of where all of your forces are. Also, you do not have to have 3 separate commanders on your flanks and vanguard. You just simply have one commander who is leading the entire army. You do also have knights. So knights work a little bit like commanders used to in Crusader Kings 2. They are very, very good on the battlefield. The more knights you have, the better. And knights are the ones who are likely to help you capture enemy forces. And the knights are also likely to kill commanders and knights in the enemy armies. I was actually hoping to go and intercept one of these armies. I guess now we're going to have the opportunity to. This is going to be a pretty... Oh no, he's getting out of there. We are going to try and get in and catch this army if we can. Let's try and catch one of them, just because I want to be able to show a battle. It does look like we'll potentially have a battle that's going to go on here. No, somehow they managed to get away from us there. No, we're going to have a battle. There we go. So here we are. So as you can see, this is the battle interface right here. We just have a balance of power that shows us which way the fight is going. We have a couple of icons that show us if there are any special troops involved. An icon that shows us what our commander's advantage is, the number of troops, the quality, and the number of knights, and also what phase the battle is in. And that's basically it. It's simplified down to the fact that usually, and again, Crusader Kings II was much like this, usually the army with the most men wins. That's basically what it comes down to. There are certainly some exceptions depending on the type of terrain that you're fighting in and what type of troops you're using, but you can normally just win with superior numbers. And while it does make managing armies a lot more simplistic, I do feel that that is probably one of the areas where it didn't need simplifying. They've gone ahead, you know, Crusader Kings has always been a complicated game when it comes to working out how you press other people's claims to fight wars to take territory, because sometimes you end up declaring a war, winning, and the territory goes to somebody else who doesn't even become your vassal and they become independent. So there are quite a lot of complexities in this game, and those things are still there, yet the combat of Crusader Kings, which has always been relatively simplistic, has been simplified even more, and I don't necessarily know if that was the right place to do that in. Maybe that's something that they will come back to and flesh out again in the future with more DLC, although it will be a shame if it takes 9 years of DLC to get certain aspects of Crusader Kings III back to where it was in Crusader Kings II. That said, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Crusader Kings isn't necessarily a game about combat, it's a game about characters, and diplomacy and spycraft are just as important as fighting in wars. But to sum this up, if you like grand strategy games, then you're probably already familiar with Crusader Kings and Crusader Kings II, and if you've played Crusader Kings II, you're going to have no problem with CK3 at all. It is very, very similar enough that you'll be able to jump right in and pick it up, but I think different enough that you will still have a really good time with it. It is replacing a 9-year-old game, so it is nice to have an updated version, even if some of the core mechanics are, you know, not too dissimilar from CK2. If you are a new player and you like strategy games, bear in mind, unlike what I would call a 4X strategy, things like Civilization or Galactic Civilizations, things like that, because Paradox games are real-time, they do tend to be a little bit more complicated. CK2 is one of the more complex grand strategies from Paradox, but now is a great time to get in. Get in early when the game is still young, when it doesn't have a decade's worth of DLC and updates behind it, because you can get in and start learning the game. It's a lot of fun. I've always said this about Paradox games, particularly with Europa Universalis 4. They take a lot of time and effort to learn. There's a lot to learn about them. They're very complicated, but once you do learn how to play them, they are really, really fun and really, really satisfying. And if you like the whole role-playing aspect of these games, then Crusader Kings is by far the best franchise that Paradox do for role-playing a character, simply because it is a game about characters and everyone has these personality traits. So that is a really, really cool thing. One more thing that has been added, which I failed to mention before, is if we go and look in our intrigue, we now have these hooks and secrets. So hooks and secrets are basically used for blackmailing people. Essentially what happens now is if you know someone's dirty secret, you get a hook against them and you can blackmail them. And you can use those hooks as a way to force them to doing certain things. So if you want somebody, for example, to relinquish a title and they won't do it, you might have a hook on them and you can blackmail them and say, well, okay, you're going to relinquish the title, or I'm going to tell everyone that you are my secret lover, or, you know, whatever hook it is that you have on them. So this is something new that has been added in, and it does make the intrigue game quite a lot more interesting. You have a number of different schemes that you can run at the same time. But apart from that, it hasn't changed much since Crusader Kings II. You still have this council of characters Some of their abilities, what they're assigned to do, have been changed a little bit. Again, it's been simplified in the way that you don't necessarily have to move your councillors around to do specific things. So, for example, your Chancellor, who can improve your diplomatic relations with other, not only other nations, but also with your vassals. In Crusader Kings 2, you'd go, well, okay, I want you to improve relations with my vassals, and you click on that button, and then you tell them which county you wanted to put them in. It doesn't work like that anymore. You basically just put them on domestic affairs, and they automatically just start bumping up opinions with all of your vassals. Or you put them on foreign affairs, and they automatically just start bumping up opinion with, well, your non-vassals, with people outside of your realm. There's no moving them around to individual spots. There are still some things that you do that on, like if you're fabricating a claim on a particular territory, or maybe you're trying to convert a culture, or maybe you're trying to convert a faith in a particular county, then you put characters in them specifically. Same with your spy master. If you want to find secrets, you can put them in a particular spot. But the council interactions, again, have been a little bit more simplified. Bear in mind, this doesn't have the functionality that one of the CK2 expansions did, where your councillors basically get to vote on various actions, like, you know, whether you go to war and things like that, where you'd always have to get your council to agree with you. That has gone away. Again, it may be something that comes back in a future DLC. But I digress. Yeah, I've had a lot of fun with Crusader Kings 3. I've uninstalled Crusader Kings 2 now. I look at it and think, well, I don't really feel any need or desire to want to play Crusader Kings 2 now that 3 is out. And yeah, I'm going to be having a lot of fun with this game. I'm going to be putting a lot more time into it. And anyone who likes role-playing games, grand strategy games, Paradox games in general, I think you should give Crusader Kings 3 a look, because it is a fun game. Yes, it certainly does have a few issues here and there with a few very little minor bugs and a few exploits that aren't majorly gameplay impacting, but I'm confident that at some point those will get patched out anyway. So thanks a lot for watching. I hope you liked this video. Please do feel free to comment, like, and subscribe if you want to see more content from me. I will be producing some Let's Play content and possibly even some tutorials for Crusader Kings 3 in the future. So thanks very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.